The little frontier town of Red Creek woke beneath a pale golden sunrise, its dusty streets already alive with the sounds of wagons, horses, and merchants calling to early customers. Humans, orcs, dwarves, and a handful of elves all passed through the settlement, yet true friendship between the races remained uncommon. Most people stayed with their own kind, carrying old fears and quiet prejudices that had survived for generations. At the edge of town stood a small bakery with a faded wooden sign swinging gently in the morning breeze. Sweet aromas of fresh bread, cinnamon rolls, and warm honey cakes drifted into the street, tempting anyone who walked past. Inside the bakery, an orc woman named Mara stood at the counter, nervously twisting the worn strap of her leather purse. Though tall and broad-shouldered like many of her people, grief had softened her once proud posture. Since her husband had died from a fever nearly 2 years earlier, every day had become a struggle. She earned a few silver coins washing clothes, repairing fences, and chopping firewood whenever anyone would hire her. Beside her stood her 7-year-old son, Brack. His bright green eyes sparkled with excitement as he stared through the bakery's glass display at a beautiful chocolate cake decorated with white cream and tiny sugar flowers. "That's the one, Mama," he whispered with a hopeful smile. "The one with the little candle." Mara forced herself to smile back. "It is beautiful," she said softly. The baker carefully wrapped the cake in a box and placed it on the counter. 6 silver coins, he said kindly. Mara opened her purse. 1, 2, 3, 4. Only 4 silver coins stared back at her. Her smile slowly disappeared. I'm sorry," she murmured, lowering her eyes. "Something came up this week. My roof needed repairing after the storm." The baker's expression softened. "I understand." She swallowed hard before speaking again. "Could you cancel the order?" Brack looked from the cake to his mother's face. "Cancel?" he asked quietly. Mara knelt beside him, placing both hands gently on his shoulders. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. We'll celebrate another day." The boy tried to be brave. "It's okay," he whispered, even though disappointment filled his eyes. "We don't really need a cake." But his voice trembled. The baker slowly lifted the cake back behind the counter while Mara turned away, hiding the tears gathering in her eyes. Near the bakery window sat a lone Apache traveler named Dakota. He had arrived before sunrise after spending several days tracking wild horses through the nearby hills. Dressed in weathered buckskin and carrying little more than his bow, bedroll, and saddlebag, he had quietly eaten breakfast while waiting for his horse to be reshod by the town's blacksmith. He had not intended to listen. Yet every word reached him. He watched the little orc boy force a smile to comfort his own mother instead of asking for what he wanted. The sight stirred memories Dakota rarely allowed himself to revisit. He remembered standing outside another shop many years ago as a hungry child, pretending he wasn't disappointed when his own family could afford nothing for his birthday after a harsh winter. He remembered telling his mother that birthdays did not matter, even though they meant everything. Some memories never truly faded. Mara gently took Brack's hand, and together they stepped out of the bakery into the bright morning sunlight. The boy never looked back at the cake, though his small shoulders seemed heavier than when he had entered. Dakota watched them disappear down the dusty street. Then he quietly stood, placed a few coins on the table for his breakfast, and looked once more toward the untouched birthday cake behind the counter. A silent decision settled in his heart. Before this day ended, that little boy would have a birthday worth remembering. Dakota stepped back into the bakery just as Mara and Brack disappeared around the corner. The baker looked up from the counter, surprised to see the quiet Apache return. "Did you forget something?" the baker asked. Dakota glanced toward the chocolate cake resting behind the display. "I'd like to buy that cake." The baker smiled gently. "For yourself?" Dakota shook his head. "For the little orc boy." The baker hesitated. "They've had a difficult year. Mara works harder than most people in this town, but work has been scarce. Dakota reached into his leather pouch and placed 6 silver coins on the counter. "Wrap it carefully," he said. "But don't tell them who paid for it." The baker nodded. "I won't." As the cake was boxed, Dakota looked around the shop. The empty tables and simple decorations gave him an idea. A cake alone would make the boy smile, but a real birthday would give him something to remember for the rest of his life. "Do you know where they live?" Dakota asked. The baker pointed toward the western hills. "A small cabin near Miller's Creek. Hard to miss. The roof still has fresh wooden shingles from yesterday's repairs." Dakota thanked him and carried the cake outside, securing it carefully in his saddlebag so it wouldn't tip over. Instead of riding straight to the cabin, he stopped at the general store. The elderly shopkeeper looked up. "Morning, traveler." Dakota picked up a bundle of colorful paper ribbons and a handful of small candles. "I'll take these." The shopkeeper wrapped them neatly. "Special occasion?" "A little boy's birthday." The old man smiled warmly. "Then take these too." He added a small wooden spinning top, carved by his grandson. "No charge." Dakota accepted the gift with a grateful nod. His next stop was the fruit stand. He bought several crisp apples and sweet berries. Seeing what he was doing, the fruit seller quietly added a basket of fresh peaches. "For the birthday table," she whispered. Word traveled quickly through the small town. By midday, people who had overheard pieces of the story began offering help. The blacksmith's wife baked warm honey biscuits. A seamstress folded colorful cloth scraps into cheerful banners. A shepherd promised fresh goat's milk. Even 2 children volunteered to gather wildflowers from the nearby meadow. No one spoke about race. For once, everyone spoke only about making one child happy. Dakota thanked each person but reminded them of one condition. "Mara must never think this is charity," he said calmly. "She has her pride. Tonight should feel like kindness, not pity." Everyone agreed. As afternoon sunlight stretched across the valley, Dakota rode toward the little cabin by Miller's Creek. From behind a line of cottonwood trees, he quietly observed Mara hanging freshly washed clothes while Brack chopped tiny pieces of firewood with determined little swings of a hatchet. The boy laughed once, pretending the logs were fierce monsters, but the laughter faded almost as quickly as it came. Dakota knew that Smile deserved another chance. He rode to the nearby church hall and asked permission to use its small yard for an evening gathering. The elderly caretaker agreed immediately. Soon, lanterns were being hung from tree branches, tables were carried outside, and ribbons fluttered gently in the breeze. As the sun slowly began to set behind the mountains, everything was finally ready. Miles away, Mara believed her son's birthday had ended before it had even begun. She had no idea that an entire community, and one quiet Apache stranger, had spent the day preparing a celebration that would soon change both of their lives forever. As the sun dipped behind the western mountains, soft shades of orange and purple spread across the evening sky. A cool breeze drifted through Miller's Creek, rustling the cottonwood trees surrounding Mara's small cabin. Inside, the tiny home was unusually quiet. Mara stirred a simple pot of vegetable stew over the fire while Brack sat at the wooden table, carving shapes into a small piece of scrap wood with a dull pocketknife his father had once owned. He tried to keep himself busy, but every now and then his eyes wandered to the empty corner where he had imagined placing his birthday cake. "I'm sorry today wasn't what I promised," Mara said softly without turning around. Brack quickly forced a smile. "It's all right, Mama. We still have dinner together." His words were kind, but Mara could hear the disappointment he was trying so hard to hide. Her heart ached. She wished she could give him the childhood he deserved instead of one filled with sacrifices and broken promises. Just then, there was a gentle knock at the door. Mara frowned. "We aren't expecting anyone." She opened the door cautiously. Standing outside was the elderly baker, holding a small lantern. "Good evening," he said warmly. "Would you and Brack mind taking a short walk with me?" There's something I'd like you to see. Mara looked confused. I'm afraid I can't leave supper. It will only take a few minutes, the baker replied with a gentle smile. Brack looked up hopefully. Can we go, Mama? Seeing the excitement in her son's eyes, Mara nodded. Together they followed the baker down a narrow path toward the old churchyard near the creek. As they rounded the final bend, Brack suddenly stopped walking. His eyes grew wide. The yard glowed with dozens of hanging lanterns that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Colorful ribbons stretched from tree to tree, and wildflowers decorated long wooden tables filled with fresh bread, fruit, honey biscuits, roasted vegetables, and pitchers of cool cider. Several children were laughing together, chasing each other across the grass. The moment they noticed Brack, they cheered. Happy birthday! Brack stood frozen in disbelief. For me, he whispered. Before anyone could answer, another familiar sound reached his ears. The slow clip-clop of a horse. Everyone turned toward the entrance of the yard. Dakota rode in quietly on his chestnut horse, carrying a carefully wrapped box in both hands. He dismounted, walked over to Brack, and knelt so they were eye to eye. I believe this belongs to you, he said gently. Brack lifted the lid. Inside rested the same chocolate cake he had admired that morning, perfectly decorated with white cream, tiny sugar flowers, and a single bright candle waiting to be lit. The little boy's mouth fell open. It's my cake. Mara covered her mouth with both hands as tears instantly filled her eyes. I don't understand, she whispered. The baker smiled. You didn't lose your son's birthday today. You reminded this town how important it is. One by one, the townspeople stepped forward carrying small gifts. The shopkeeper presented the hand-carved spinning top. The fruit seller offered a basket overflowing with peaches and berries. The blacksmith's wife handed Mara a warm loaf of bread. Even children Brack had never met before gave him polished stones, handmade toys, and bunches of colorful wildflowers. For the first time since losing her husband, Mara saw strangers looking at her family not with suspicion, but with kindness. Dakota quietly lit the candle and stepped back into the crowd. This wish belongs to you, he said. Brack closed his eyes tightly, made his birthday wish, and blew out the candle in one joyful breath. As cheers and laughter echoed beneath the glowing lanterns, Mara realized that the greatest gift of the evening was not the beautiful cake. It was the reminder that hope could still find its way into even the loneliest hearts. The celebration continued long after the birthday candles had burned out. Laughter echoed beneath the lanterns as children raced through the churchyard, inventing games with wooden sticks and smooth river stones. Brack proudly showed off his carved spinning top, cheering each time it whirled across the ground. For the first time in many months, he looked like any other happy 7-year-old boy. Mara stood quietly near the food table, watching her son laugh with children from every race. Humans, dwarves, elves, and orcs played together without arguing or staring at one another. It was a sight she had never expected to witness in Red Creek. Her eyes searched the crowd until they found Dakota. The Apache stood alone near the creek, gazing at the moonlight reflecting across the water. He seemed content simply watching everyone else enjoy the evening. Mara walked toward him. I've been trying to thank you all night, she said softly. Dakota gave a small nod. You don't owe me thanks. I do. She looked back at Brack. I haven't seen him smile like that since his father died. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of distant laughter filled the silence. Finally, Mara asked the question that had been weighing on her heart. Why would you do all this for strangers? Dakota rested his hands on the wooden fence beside the creek. When I was about Brack's age, he began quietly, my village suffered through a harsh winter. Food was scarce, and every family worried about surviving until spring. He paused as old memories returned. My birthday came during the coldest week of that winter. Mara listened without interrupting. My mother apologized because she had nothing to give me. Not a gift. Not a sweet. Not even enough flour to bake bread. He smiled faintly. I remember pretending I wasn't disappointed. I told her birthdays didn't matter. But they did, Mara whispered. Dakota nodded. They mattered more than I admitted. He picked up a small stone and gently tossed it into the creek, watching the ripples spread across the dark water. A traveling hunter passed through our village that evening. He noticed my mother trying to hide her tears. Dakota's voice softened. He didn't have much himself. But he shared part of his meal with us, carved me a tiny wooden horse from a branch, and stayed long enough to tell stories around our fire. He looked toward Brack. I don't remember what we ate that night. I barely remember the toy. But I never forgot how that stranger made a little boy feel seen. Mara's eyes glistened. So today. Dakota smiled. Today I simply repaid a kindness that was given to me many years ago. A tear rolled down Mara's cheek. I've spent so long believing people only noticed us when they wanted something. Dakota shook his head gently. Sometimes people only need someone willing to make the first move. At that moment, Brack ran over carrying 2 slices of birthday cake. Mr. Dakota, he called happily. I saved you the biggest piece. Dakota laughed softly. I think the birthday boy deserves that. Brack shook his head with a grin. Mama says heroes eat first. The simple words caught Dakota completely by surprise. For a brief moment, he couldn't speak. He accepted the plate with grateful hands, realizing that the greatest reward for his kindness wasn't the gratitude of the townspeople or even Mara's tears. It was the trust of a little boy who no longer saw him as a stranger, but as someone who had turned the saddest day of his year into the happiest memory of his childhood. The birthday celebration ended late that evening, but its warmth did not fade with the lanterns. As families walked home beneath the stars, they carried more than full stomachs and happy memories, they carried a new way of looking at one another. The next morning, Red Creek felt different. People who had barely spoken to Mara before now greeted her with friendly smiles. The same neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid the orc widow now nodded respectfully as she walked through town with Brack beside her. At the bakery, the elderly baker hung a small wooden sign near the counter. Every child deserves a birthday. When customers asked about it, he simply smiled. From now on, once each month, this bakery will provide a birthday cake for a family going through hard times. Several regular customers immediately dropped silver coins into a small wooden box beside the register. Use these for the children, they said. Across the street, the general store owner had been inspired as well. He placed a basket near the entrance filled with toys, books, and blankets. If you can give, leave something, the sign read. If you need, take something. Within days, the basket overflowed with donations. Dakota never asked anyone to do these things. He simply continued helping around town while waiting for the next horse-trading caravan to arrive. He repaired broken fences for elderly farmers, helped the blacksmith lift heavy wagon wheels, and taught local children how to track rabbit prints along the creek without disturbing the wildlife. His quiet actions spoke louder than grand speeches ever could. Meanwhile, Mara found herself receiving something she had almost forgotten existed: opportunity. The innkeeper offered her steady work preparing meals in the kitchen 3 days each week. A rancher hired her to mend saddles and repair harnesses. The schoolteacher even asked if she would teach the children how to weave strong rope from river reeds, a skill she had learned from her own parents. For the first time since her husband's passing, Mara earned enough money to buy food without worrying whether there would be enough left for firewood. One afternoon, as she finished work at the inn, she found Brack laughing outside with 3 human children and a young dwarf. They were building a toy fort from fallen branches. Not long ago, the other children had kept their distance. Now they argued only about whose turn it was to guard the imaginary castle. Watching them, Mara felt tears of gratitude fill her eyes once again. Later that evening, she visited Dakota, who was repairing the fence outside the church. "You've changed this town," she said. Dakota smiled without looking up. No. He hammered another fence post into the ground. The town changed itself. I only reminded people of who they could be. Just then, the pastor approached carrying a small notebook. We've decided to start something new, he announced. Every season, the people of Red Creek will gather for a community day, sharing meals, games, and music so no family ever feels alone again. Everyone agreed. As the weeks passed, the old barriers between races slowly began to fade. Trust replaced suspicion, kindness replaced silence, and children grew up playing together instead of apart. Looking across the lively town square one evening, Dakota realized that a single birthday cake had become something far greater. It had planted a seed of compassion that was now growing in every corner of Red Creek, proof that one act of selfless kindness could change not just one child's life, but the heart of an entire community. A full year passed, and with each changing season, Red Creek grew warmer in spirit than it had ever been before. The old mistrust that had once divided humans, orcs, dwarves, and elves had not disappeared completely, but it no longer ruled the town. Neighbors greeted one another by name, children played together after school, and the community days had become a cherished tradition. Dakota had planned to leave many times. As a horse tracker and traveler, he was used to living with only what he could carry. Staying in one place had never been part of his life. Yet every time he packed his saddlebag, someone in town needed a fence repaired, a horse trained, or a young hunter taught how to read the land. Before he realized it, Red Creek had begun to feel less like a stop along the trail and more like a home. One crisp autumn morning, there was a knock at the door of the small cabin where Dakota was staying. When he opened it, Brack stood outside, grinning from ear to ear. He was taller than the year before, his shoulders a little broader and his eyes brighter with confidence. You have to come with me, Brack said excitedly. Dakota chuckled. And where are we going? It's a surprise. Laughing, Dakota followed the boy through the streets of Red Creek. As they approached the churchyard, he noticed colorful ribbons hanging from the trees once again. Lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, and long tables were covered with fresh bread, roasted vegetables, fruit pies, and steaming pots of stew. The entire town was gathered. The moment Dakota stepped into the yard, everyone began applauding. He stopped in surprise. Mara walked forward, carrying a beautifully decorated chocolate cake, larger than the one from the year before. White cream swirled across the top, surrounded by bright sugar flowers. Brack carefully carried the cake to the center table. This year, the boy said proudly, I got to choose who receives the first slice. The crowd fell silent. Brack picked up the cake knife, cut a generous slice, and placed it on a plate. Then he walked straight to Dakota. This belongs to you. Dakota blinked in surprise. But it's your birthday. Brack smiled. You taught me something. Birthdays aren't just about getting gifts. They're about sharing happiness. He held out the plate. And you're part of my family now. For a long moment, Dakota couldn't speak. No one had called him family since he was a young boy. Slowly, he accepted the plate with trembling hands. Mara stepped beside her son. A year ago, you gave my child more than a birthday, she said softly. You gave him hope. She smiled through grateful tears. And you gave me the courage to believe in people again. The townspeople nodded in agreement. The baker raised his cup, followed by the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, and every family gathered there. To kindness, the baker called. To family, answered the crowd. As laughter filled the air, Dakota looked around the yard. Children of every race chased one another beneath the lanterns, just as they had a year before. The little celebration that had begun with one cake had become a yearly tradition, ensuring that no child in Red Creek would ever face a forgotten birthday again. Dakota smiled as he watched Brack laughing with his friends. He had arrived in Red Creek as a lonely traveler with no destination beyond the next sunrise. He left behind something far greater than footprints on a trail. He left a legacy of compassion, proving that one simple act of kindness could mend broken hearts, unite a divided community, and turn strangers into family.